The early morning light spilled through the high windows of Terminal 4 at JFK Airport, casting long beams across the polished floors. Travelers shuffled through the security lines, tugging suitcases, juggling coffees, eyes glued to phones. Amid the quiet bustle, one man moved with a kind of composed stillness that drew subtle glances even from the most hurried passengers. Anthony Caldwell adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit jacket as he approached Gate 19. His tailored attire, understated Rolex, and crisp leather briefcase spoke of a man accustomed to navigating worlds where details mattered. And yet, as he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, he recognized the shift instantly: the pause, the wary look, the tightening lips. The agent, a woman named Rachel Meyer, pressed the boarding pass against the scanner, frowned, and glanced at her colleague, Brian Carter, stationed a few feet away. She leaned over, whispering something too low for Anthony to catch. "Can I see your ID, sir?" Rachel asked, her voice edged with authority that felt less procedural and more defensive. Anthony raised an eyebrow slightly. "Is there a problem?" "It's just protocol," she said quickly, but her glance over his shoulder betrayed unease rather than procedure. Anthony knew better. First-class passengers with valid tickets rarely faced secondary ID checks at the gate, especially not after clearing security. This wasn't about protocol. Without a word, Anthony produced his driver's license, placing it calmly on the counter. Rachel didn't scan it. She didn't even glance at the information. Instead, she laid it on the desk like a confiscated item and turned away, murmuring urgently into her headset. Moments later, a security officer materialized, arms crossed, eyes hard with skepticism. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He simply positioned himself a few feet from Anthony, a silent threat cloaked in official authority. Anthony exhaled slowly. He'd seen this before, enough times to recognize it not as an isolated mistake, but as a recurring echo of assumptions never truly addressed. He stepped aside deliberately, away from the boarding lane, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved with a precise patience as he dialed a number he knew by heart. "Sasha," he said quietly when the call connected, "I need you to retrieve the Ascendant Air agreement we signed last month." "Gata 19 JFK. I'll wait." Outside the glass walls, planes glided across the tarmac, gleaming in the rising sun. Anthony stood motionless, composed, while murmurs stirred behind him. "Is there a problem?" a passenger asked, his voice pitched too loudly to be casual. Rachel's face flushed. Into her headset, she muttered, "We're resolving a minor issue at the gate. Thank you for your patience." But the crowd was growing restless, the energy shifting. On the other end of the line, Sasha Gray, Anthony's chief of staff, responded crisply. "Got it. Contract total, $52 million. Signed 3 weeks ago. Do you want me to escalate to their corporate office?" Anthony's voice was low and even. "Not yet. Flag it for now." Anthony Caldwell wasn't just any first-class passenger. He was the CEO of Caldwell Harvest, a premier supplier of organic produce to universities, hospitals, and, most recently, Ascendant Air. His contract, finalized after months of negotiations, was the cornerstone of the airline's new sustainable dining initiative rebranding campaign they had bet tens of millions on. He didn't need to flash status symbols or demand recognition. His power was woven into the quiet fabric of influence. Partnerships built on trust, reputation, and relentless standards. But to the gate agent who had scrutinized his ticket like contraband, none of that mattered. Rachel Meyer was 6 months into her position, eager to prove herself in a cutthroat environment. Her supervisors emphasized vigilance, adherence to policy, and maintaining control at all costs. What they didn't teach, apparently, was discernment. Beside her, Brian Carter shifted uncomfortably, watching the unfolding situation. He leaned closer. "Rachel," he whispered, "I think you should double-check something." Rachel stiffened. His ID didn't scan properly. "Maybe," Brian said carefully. "Or maybe you don't realize who he is." Rachel's heart skipped. She opened the system again, hesitating. Brian pointed discreetly at the vendor alert list pinned to the back wall highlighted at the top. Caldwell Harvest Ascendant Air Strategic Partner. Recognition dawned too late. At that moment, Anthony remained by the window, back turned to the gate chaos, speaking quietly into his phone. Sasha's second update came through. Ascendant's VP of Partnerships has been informed. They're moving. Meanwhile, 40 stories above in a glass office overlooking Midtown, Elena Martin, Ascendant Air's executive vice president, fielded the call from Sasha. A boarding issue, Elena repeated sharply. With Anthony Caldwell, Sasha's voice remained impeccably polite. Correct. Your staff has prevented Mr. Caldwell from boarding despite a fully valid first-class ticket. Elena didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. Within seconds, she was striding toward the elevator, firing off texts to legal, PR, and the COO. At the gate, passengers' irritation curdled into open complaint. A businessman barked at Rachel. You're holding up the whole flight over what exactly? Rachel's hands shook as she fumbled with the keyboard. Her eyes darted toward Anthony, who stood immobile, patient but unyielding. Then, from the corner of the terminal, Elena Martin appeared, moving with purposeful urgency, flanked by legal counsel David Shaw. Elena's sharp gaze immediately found Anthony. She crossed the gate area in a few brisk strides. Mr. Caldwell, she said, extending her hand. Elena Martin, Executive VP at Ascendant. May I have a moment? Anthony turned, his gaze steady. Of course. They stepped aside. Elena kept her voice low but firm. On behalf of Ascendant, I deeply apologize. This was an unacceptable failure of our staff's judgment. Anthony's lips quirked slightly. A failure of judgment, he repeated. Or something deeper? Elena didn't deflect. Both. And we're addressing it immediately. Anthony studied her for a moment, weighing her sincerity. Then he said, I wonder what assumptions your staff made when they saw me standing here. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Wrong ones. And it's my responsibility to make sure they don't happen again. From a few feet away, Rachel watched, her heart sinking as realization crushed her. David Shaw joined them, offering a businesslike nod. Mr. Caldwell, we're prepared to offer both public and private apologies. Any additional remedies you require, we're prepared to discuss. Anthony's voice was soft but unmistakably firm. I'm not interested in apologies, Mr. Shaw. I'm interested in understanding why an airline that prides itself on innovation permits outdated prejudices to persist at its gates. Silence stretched. Elena met his gaze. We will conduct a full review bias training, operational changes. Real change, not lip service. Anthony reached into his briefcase and handed Elena a copy of the Caldwell Harvest contract. You rely on my company to supply every fresh ingredient on your premier flights. When you question my presence here, you question your own foundation. Elena accepted the folder solemnly. Understood. Anthony's voice dropped lower. And next time, it may not be someone with my resources standing here. The meaning settled heavily in the space between them. Elena escorted Anthony down the jet bridge personally. The flight attendants, already briefed, treated him with deference born of sudden, urgent understanding. Anthony took his seat, one assolent and composed, untouched by the turmoil, still rippling outward from Gate 19. As the plane pushed back from the terminal, Ascendant Air scrambled behind the scenes. Meetings, damage control, internal investigations. Rachel Meyer was quietly pulled from duty pending review. Legal teams drafted statements. PR strategists outlined contingency plans. But Anthony Caldwell didn't need a press conference. He wasn't interested in headlines or vindication. His victory was quieter and deeper. When Anthony arrived in Seattle for the Agricultural Summit, he blended into the crowd, shaking hands, listening more than speaking. His keynote address was reserved, elegant. He spoke of trust, of systems that crumble when built on flawed assumptions, of small farmers who transform entire markets with a single season of faith and hard work. Near the end, he paused. It's not just how we grow our food, Anthony said to a rapt audience. It's how we see each other. Assumptions, left unchecked, can rot the strongest foundation. Trust demands more. The applause was not raucous, but it was deep and genuine. Back in New York, Elena Martin moved swiftly. Within a month, Ascendant Air launched a new initiative: partnerships with diversity advocates, mandatory sensitivity training, and a subtle but unmistakable shift in company culture. Rachel Meyer wasn't fired. Anthony hadn't demanded it, but she received an official reprimand, a transfer, and a compulsory retraining assignment that forced her to confront more than just procedural gaps. Anthony Caldwell's name surfaced in industry journals not for the confrontation, but as a catalyst for reform. He didn't seek public acknowledgement. He declined interviews, waived compensation offers, and returned to his work with the same steady purpose that had built his career. And in a small house in Cleveland, his mother, Margaret Caldwell, clipped an article from a trade magazine, tucked it into a worn photo album, and whispered proudly to the faded picture of her son as a boy, "That's my Anthony." Because sometimes the strongest message isn't shouted. It's delivered by standing still and letting the world see its own reflection.